Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. You've joined us for the webinar Strategic Execution Demystified, Unravelling the High Failure Rate. My name's Lynn Hunter. I'm one of the training producers at Informa Connect. And I'm just going to take a couple of minutes just to give you some information about Informa Connect just before I hand over to Alan, who will take you through the full webinar. So just in case some of you don't know who we are, Informa Connect, we are we're in 30 countries around the world, and we have learners in over 170 countries. So we really do have a global reach as an organisation. And here in the Middle East, we focus mainly on training and development. So we're looking at how can we connect people with information, how can we connect people with content, to aid them in their daily working lives, private lives, etc. So that's where we focus our experience in Informa Connect Academy. And we do that with over 35,000 learners each year. So that's the number of people that we touch over a year's period. It's around 35,000 people who come to one of our events, our conferences, our exhibitions, or our training programs. And here in the Middle East, what we focus on as well is we have two sides to our learning. So we have one side, which is our public learning programs, which is you can join Alan, for instance, on a program on strategy execution, if that's what you want to learn about. We have dates that we'll tell you the dates that we have of training programs coming up, but you can join those. But we also work very closely with clients to do what we would call an in-house training program. So therefore, if your company has a number of people that they would like to have a training program, then we can have a more customized in-house training program for them as well. So the session today is with Alan Fell, and I'm very delighted to introduce you to Alan. He will go into more details himself with you about his experience, but Alan is an extremely experienced management consultant and training specialist. He's actually worked with Informa for over 29 years. And in that time, he has done hundreds of events, whether it's webinars, training programs, etc. So Alan brings a wealth of knowledge. He became a senior associate with Balanced Scorecard in 2010, the Balanced Scorecard Institute, and does a lot of, and his specialization is that execution arena. So what I will do is I'll pass you to Alan, who will begin the webinar now. If you do have any questions, can we just ask you to put them into the chat box? And then at the end of the session, we will have time for some questions and answers. But if you'd like to just type them into your chat box, and then I can read your questions out towards the end. So thank you very much for joining us. And Alan, I will pass you across. Thank you.
Okay, Lynn, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. To this webinar. You have to say that these days because we tend to get a global delegate list, which is great. Before we hit a few slides, Lynn's given you a brief introduction, so I'll just say thank you to Informa for arranging this and facilitating this. And I'm delighted to share some thoughts with you today. But before we actually touch any slides and start to go through the brief substance that we have in this short webinar, what's the problem? The problem really is very simple. Every organization has some form of medium-term plan. And in many cases, it's something which is crafted over months of hard work and a lot of thinking, a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiation, and a lot of documentation and making sure it's aligned in the organization, and so on and so on. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that process and get engaged in it probably once a year doing a refresh. But despite the fact that we've all got a plan, the success rate of implementing is incredibly poor. And it has been for decades. It's been a recognized problem, but I'm pleased to see that I think there's much more emphasis today on the execution side and not simply on planning, because there's no point in having a plan if we don't execute it, and if we cannot execute it successfully. So that's really what I just want to touch on. And it's always easy to talk about problems and common problems and so on. You can get lists of those on the internet. You don't need me to tell you this sort of thing. But what I want to focus on are solutions. How do we actually work to improve our execution success rate? That's really what I want to think about as we go through. So that's just by way of brief introduction. If I can make it work, I'm going to share screen and hopefully just get it on full screen. So what you should have, I hope, is a full screen strategy execution demystified, unraveling the high failure rate. So I hope you've got that. Anyone?
We can see that. Yes, thank you.
Lovely.
Yes.
Thanks, Lynn. Right. So let me get straight into it. Lynn's already done a little bit of introduction for me, so I'll keep this extremely short, but my focus these days is on balanced scorecards and strategy execution, and those two fit fairly comfortably together. I've been doing this sort of role for 20 odd years, and before that I did 20 odd years in a commercial bank in London. I'm a Brit, in case that's not obvious, but most people find it is obvious. But my main geographic focus is the Middle East and the Asia-Pacific region. I do occasionally do programs in the UK itself and also in Africa, but principally Middle East and then Asia-Pacific. And in fact, the week after next, I'm going to be running one of the Balanced Scorecard Institute's programs in the Gold Coast, Australia, which I'm really looking forward to going down under, as we say, to meet my Australian friends. So a lot of experience. I'm not going to read all of this out. It's fairly self-explanatory, but a lot of experience. And my focus is not on theory. I'm not interested in the sort of academic side of this. I'm interested in practicalities. What is it that organizations should be doing to help improve the execution, the implementation of their plans? That's where my focus comes. So just the structure of this short webinar. So I want to talk a little bit about the underlying challenge. Why does it often fail? And we'll get into that a bit more. A new training program we're launching from the Balanced Scorecard Institute, which is addressing exactly this challenge, which is how can we help people to improve their success rate? And at the final bit, just to emphasize how this new program fits with existing Balanced Scorecard Institute programs. I've no doubt some of you have attended those courses or will certainly be aware of them. So how it all fits together. So the basic challenge, yeah, we've all got a plan, but we struggle. And of course, not everyone does. Some are great. And we can talk perhaps at the end in the Q&A session. Why is it that some organizations are successful at this? What are the key factors, the key success factors? But it is widely recognized that the failure rate is high. And that's really what we're focused on, is how can we improve the result side. And it seems strange because so much effort is put into strategy, and anything with the word strategy, it's the most overused word certainly in the business vocabulary, because what we mean by strategy usually is anything which seems a bit important or dealt with by more senior people, often not strictly what is business strategy itself. There are all sorts of quotes on the subject. There was a famous quote 30 odd years ago from Fortune magazine that basically said the failure rate was 90%. Well, things have definitely got better. There's more focus on the subject of how can we successfully implement our plans? What are the barriers that we need to manage? And a fairly recent paper from Forbes magazine, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Forbes, they're suggesting there's an average failure rate around about 50%. So it's a big issue. And if you do any survey of chief executives and what are their major concerns, of course, things like recovery from COVID and geopolitics and commodity prices and just managing the cash after the COVID pandemic and so on. But always in that top list, you see strategy execution. It's not, do we have a plan? Yes, we have a plan. It's, can we deliver it? That's the challenge. Seen all the way from the boardroom or the ministry level, all the way down the organization. And here's another Fortune magazine article, again, some years ago now, but relevant to quote. And it was looking at why do companies actually fire their chief executives? Not why do they resign to go and spend more time with the family or any other kind of innocuous excuse. Why are they dismissed? And the answer from their survey was 70% of the cases was about the failure to execute the strategy. The strategy and the strategic plan had been developed. It had been approved by the board of directors or by the public sector equivalent. The responsibility of the top management was to deliver the promise. And in so many cases, they didn't. And in so many cases, they were fired as a result of that. So, this is job security for senior executives. What do we mean by strategy? Again, I'm trying to use simple words here. So what we're really looking at is choosing the best route to reach the goal or the destination or the result. What is the strategic result we want to achieve, or the goal or the destination? Those titles are used interchangeably, but destination actually is a good word to use. And I just make the comment, if you don't have a clear goal, choosing the best route to reach that goal becomes a bit difficult, to say the least. And this is one of the early weaknesses. So many organizations that I work with and have worked with over these 25 plus years. When you ask top management, what are your overall goals? Not what are the things you do to reach it, but what is your goal, your destination? In so many cases, it's unclear. It is frightening just how many times there is no clear, measurable answer. I often use the analogy of a taxi journey. When you get in a taxi, what do? You say to the taxi driver, as I often do, please take me to London Heathrow Airport, Terminal 3. Off we go. That's very clear. If I just said to him, can you take me to a nearby airport? Well, London's got 6 airports. That's a problem in itself. So unless we're clear in the destination we want to reach, our goal, working out a plan to get there is illogical. And yet so many organizations do this. They're terribly busy doing things, but there's no clear understanding and agreement of what that goal is. I could talk a lot on that. Well, I could talk on this subject for ages. This is a major topic I cover when I'm in training mode or with clients in a consulting mode, because so often it's the start point that needs to be sorted out. But that's what strategy is, choosing the best route to reach the goal. Academics will put a lot of fancy words around that, but that's essentially what we're doing. What do we mean by strategy execution failure? We can quote 50% or 70% failure, but what does that mean? And I look at it in 2 ways. The first one is quite simply, did we achieve the goal, whatever the goal was, for the period in question? Or the second one, number 2, is failure to achieve the sort of composite targets that describe the strategic plan as a whole. I personally think of it in both ways. So if I'm looking at a company, I will sort of look at it from both these perspectives to evaluate how well they've done. But it's amazing how many times you have a conversation with someone very senior in the organization. And how good are you at executing your strategy? Say, oh, we're pretty good. We're pretty good. What was your execution score last year? Ah, well, we don't quite look at it like that. In other words, they don't have a clear goal. They're not measuring. It's sort of a vague, we'll get in the taxi and we'll make some progress towards getting to our destination. But, you know, it's all a bit vague. This is not the way to run a business. I just thought I'd show you two ways of doing this with the balanced scorecard, because the scorecard is the classic supporting management tool for strategy execution. What you see on screen is a very common format. It's a scorecard with the famous 4 perspectives and the objectives and KPIs and targets and measures and the like. Fine. And in itself, that's usually a huge step forward from what went in the past. But there's no overall score. You can't really look at it and say, well, so we executed the strategy, or we didn't. If you do the second example, this one creates an overall score. Now, you can't read the detail, and that's not the point. I don't want you to read the detail. Don't try to, please. It's just about the concept that in this scorecard design, it actually created a weighted composite score, which was 102.6% at the year end. The plan was 100. So if you looked at this organization, you could say, well, our plan represented 100 points. We achieved 102.6. Therefore, we've executed the strategy. If you wanted to look at this same example purely on the goals, there are 2 goals there. They're not separately highlighted. They're just shown as part of the sort of scorecard dashboard system. But both of those goals were green. It comes out as a dirty blue because it's a very old scorecard, but they were green. So on either basis of evaluating success or failure, this was a success. If you can't measure it, it gets tricky. And the old adage, if you can't measure, you don't manage it very well. So that's just something to think about. Strategy management, I tend to think of as having 4 main steps. We do the analysis and the thinking, and this includes benchmarking, SWOT and PEST analysis, if you use those very popular tools, or whatever you do, competitive analysis of one sort or another. But it's the input to the whole planning process. Number 2 is actually formulating the strategy, and here we think about the vision. Is the vision up to date? Do we have clear goals? What are the overall themes or priorities in our strategy? What are the main themes of our sort of customer value proposition or stakeholder value proposition? What is it we're competing on? And what is it we're not competing on? Strategy is choosing what not to do, as a famous quote goes. And then we convert that, number 3, the strategic plan. Often very detailed with the alignment and cascading of how each individual and how each department is going to contribute to the whole. What are the supporting projects? What are the budgets? What are the manpower budgets as well as financial budgets? Ultimately, who's going to do what to contribute to collectively implementing the plan and achieving the strategic goals of the organization? And then the final box, strategy execution. We actually implement it. Now, logically, of course, the vast proportion of our effort should go in the implementation, not in the planning side. What I do, and I was sharing this in another recent webinar, so I'll keep it short in case there's any double counting here. How do I rate each of these 4 components of the strategy management? Purely from my own experience. So this is not a scientific survey. This is not using anyone else's published data. This is my personal observation over, what, 30 plus years in total of doing strategy management in one role or another. 9 out of 10. This is usually done pretty well. It's the start of the planning. Doesn't require decisions. It just requires people to put forward opinions and to do research and to document that research. The big picture, the formulation of strategy, 7 out of 10. And the reason I downgrade it from the previous one is this issue of goals. They're often not clear. I would say the vast majority of businesses that I meet do not have clear goals. Actually, I remember a client I was with recently. This is the board of directors of a company. And when I put it to the test and just got them to write on their notepads, each of the directors could write down what the vision statement was. But when it came to describing the goals, which simply measurably described the vision, they had very different views. And if the board of directors don't have a clear, united view of where they want their organization to get to, what chance is there that the junior staff way down the organization will have any clue whatsoever? So there's an issue here, and then the communication point we'll touch later. Then we convert it into a plan. And I only give it 5 out of 10. And the reason, and I'll put those in the box at the bottom in a minute, but so many of the problems inherent in execution start with poor planning. And then the execution itself, I'm going to give about 4 out of 10, which reflects really the general view, 50, 60, 70% of execution is failure. And the challenge is this. Did we have a good plan and poor execution, or was the plan poor in the first place? And if you talk to the typical senior executive in an organization, public sector, private sector, doesn't matter, I can pretty much guarantee they will defend their plan. Yes, this is a good plan. And the reason why we didn't execute successfully is due to external factors. That's the excuse territory. We'll blame the government, we'll blame geopolitics, or COVID, or climate change, or whatever. These are easy things to do. The reality very often is different. The reality very often is that it is the plan itself which is the cause of many of, not all, but many of the challenges that go into execution. I mean, unrealistic planning is in all sorts of ways tends to go on. A quote I really like, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I've seen other people make very similar quotes. You can have results or excuses. And an interesting question is, what is your balance between a performance culture, a results culture, and an excuse culture? Where are you on that axis between performance on the one hand and excuse on the other? And too many people, I mean organizations when I say people, too many organizations are too far down towards excuses. And if you have an excuse culture, forget it. You will not be successful. What distinguishes a high-performance business from a low-performance business? All sorts of answers. But the cultural side, the performance culture side is crucial. The leadership is crucial. Communication is crucial. So I want to just on the next slide or so ask the questions, what are the more common challenges that I see, first of all, arising from planning, and then on the next slide, to do with other factors. So I'll just whistle through these quickly. So the results or the goals or the destination, not clear. And if that's the case, you've got confusion. The second one is the alignment between the organization, departments or functions or divisions, and then individuals and small teams. Very often that alignment process doesn't work well. I know from training programs, particularly when I'm doing KPI training, which I'm doing in Australia shortly. You go through the concept with people and everyone's clear. And are there any questions? No, that's fine. Got it. The moment they actually start to do it, in most cases, they go way off track. So whilst the concept and the desirability of linking together, aligning, is clear, it's often difficult to achieve in practice. And that also includes horizontal alignment, particularly between operating divisions or departments and support divisions or departments, how they relate. Lack of ownership and accountability. This is common, especially in the public sector. We want to hide behind a committee, or indeed hide behind nothing. Just have no concept of ownership and accountability. If this is how we work, it's difficult. So this is all part of the performance culture, to understand what ownership and accountability means and how it's applied in your organization. Inappropriate KPIs. What gets measured gets managed. You measure the wrong thing, you're managing the wrong thing. It's very simple. I mean, this just happens everywhere. Initiative overload, trying to do too many things, too many projects, or too many initiatives, as we like to call them. Very common. Time and time again, I see examples. I recall one in Abu Dhabi, quite some years ago now, but it was an interesting case. I was asked to help a company they were going through a planning phase, and to help them to put this into the format of a scorecard and to set up the scorecard as a regular performance reporting system. Straightforward. That's what I do for my day job, as it were. But when I really got into the organization, the challenge they had was initiative overload. And just trying to do far too many things, with the result, of course, that everything gets diluted and you achieve very little. And so an early part of the development process, and it's something we emphasize in our training programs, is initiative prioritization and selection. And we took it down, and I still remember the numbers, from 84 proposed initiatives or projects down to 29. And it was the view of top management, 29 was doable. It was phased over a couple of years. They had the resources, they had the capability, and that's what went ahead. But 84, they couldn't cope. Rigidity, a lack of strategic agility built into the plan. Now, how you do that depends hugely what type of organization, by the industry dynamics they're in, and so on and so on. But organizations that find it difficult to change when the outside world changes, they will be the losers. I remember, if I just tell a quick story, I remember many years ago, this was 9/11, so a long time ago, I know that. But I was flying a couple of days after 9/11, And I heard the chief executive of the airline interviewed that morning on TV. And he said, obviously, it's a human tragedy and all these people killed. But he said, for us, it's a competitive advantage. And I thought, what does he mean? He said, we're agile. We have already adjusted our strategy. We have already adjusted all sorts of things. We are not changing our profit forecast. We're not changing our growth forecast at a time when the industry was in turmoil. He said, the problem is some of the competition, it will take them 6 months to decide who should be on a committee to consider the subject. Now, exaggeration, I know, but nonetheless, the point was, we are agile. We've already responded. A lot of our competition will be very slow moving and we'll beat them. This is a competitive advantage. And so it is. And finally, poor and ineffective communication. I sometimes say to people on my training courses, if you do nothing else after the 3 or 5 days we've spent together, just go back to your organization and improve the communication of strategy. You will add value to your company by doing that. So those are common issues associated with planning. So the planning has not picked up these issues or addressed them properly. In addition to that, ineffective performance monitoring, keeping the score. I want to talk a bit more about that. Leadership not engaged. I'm afraid this is quite common. You have a strategy management office or whatever it is called. In the old days, it used to be called corporate planning, but now strategy management office is the title. But if it's just a reactive scorekeeper, it's not adding much value. So to get a really dynamic, proactive strategy management office is very important. Project management, if this is done poorly, even if we've sorted out the overload problem in the planning, but if we are poor at executing projects which we should be able to execute, then we have a major problem. The whole issue of culture, an excuse culture rather than a results culture. And again, I come back to communication, ineffective communication. So just a few things to follow on from that. Those first 2 items, let me make another comment. And it's quite simply this. The monthly or quarterly executive committee or whatever you call it, senior management team, meeting to review strategic progress using a balanced scorecard or something similar. Some of those meetings are great. I've sat in endless meetings like this over the last 30 odd years. And some of them are beautiful. They're well chaired, they're professional, they're decisive, they're great. But so many of them are poor. And just the whole behaviors. The chairmanship is not good. People come in late. And of course, the number one, if you can see me in the corner of the screen, the phone. I mean, phones should be off. Not on vibrate or whatever. They should be off while you're discussing this. There are a lot of it's sheer professionalism or lack of professionalism. But this is major issue from my personal experience, not given sufficient prominence. So how can we help? We're just launching a new 4-day program. It's been developed in the Institute. 5 of us have worked on it. I'm happy to say I'm one of the co-authors. The other 4 are based in the States. They're actually full-time officers of the Institute. And we've really combined our collective business knowledge, which is a frightening number because most of us are getting on a bit in years. So I won't even share with you how many years of business experience we combine, but let's just say it's a lot. And we've developed this new program. And I just want to share a little bit about it. So we call it the Strategy Execution Professional Program, similar way to the Balanced Scorecard Professional and so on that we've had in place for many, many years. And the way we structure this is to think, what is this bridge between planning and execution? And we talk about 5 imperatives that they're ringed around here in red. These are the 5 main areas that we believe need to focus on, make sure we have good practice, make sure we are avoiding the common problems to help us to improve our performance. And can I, when we talk about improving strategy execution, there's no magic wand. Let's be crystal clear. There's no simple magic wand, otherwise we'd all do it. But if we can improve our performance from, say, achieving 70% of the plan to 90% of the plan, that's a huge improvement in performance. Technically, we may not have achieved 100%, so we've arguably failed in inverted commas, but the failure gap is much, much smaller. So we've added value. We have significantly improved the performance of the organization. That's what I think we have to focus on. So looking at it another way around, here are the 5 imperatives. We put leadership and governance at the center. We think this is absolutely central core issue. And then each of these in the program is broken down into components, and we discuss good practice, we discuss common problems, we have a lot of discussion in the class about individual cases, we share our own experiences, countless client experiences at this on this sort of subject. And this is the way we do it. If I just take performance or change culture, which we subdivide into these various bullets here, I won't go through them all. But the idea is we go through each of those, discuss it, and then summarize at the end, and we have what we call a roadmap development. And the idea of the roadmap development, it's basically a gap analysis. And so for each of these topics, we get people to do a gap analysis between where they are and where they believe their organization should be. We get them to think about the underlying cause, not just the symptom. You've got to understand the underlying cause if we have a gap. And then what are the realistic, and I put realistic in italics to emphasize, what are the realistic action plans that can be identified to help close that gap that we've talked about at the beginning, the gap analysis. And if I just think of communication, from my own experience, this is just an example. What are the underlying causes when strategy communication is not very good? And 4 of them come up quite commonly. We're not quite sure what the message is anyway, so I don't want to stand up and communicate it, because then I seem to be taking ownership, and I don't want ownership. I want to stand back from this. And in any case, it's not clear. So, the last thing I'm going to do is stand up and communicate. Another one, personal lack of confidence at communication. Some very senior and tremendous people, tremendous in other respects, are not good communicators. And if they can't communicate, and they know they can't communicate, they really don't want to be backed in a corner and say, listen, boss, you've got to stand in front of 300 of your staff and explain something. That lack of confidence. Chief executive thinks it's already done because he held a staff meeting. Here we are in, my goodness, the 1st of May. Where is 2024 going to? Anyway, here we are on the 1st of May, and he did a town hall meeting last October, and he fondly imagines that everyone attended, everyone paid attention, which they certainly didn't, everyone understood, which they certainly didn't, and everyone can remember everything he said, which they certainly can't. But in his mind, kind of tick the box. I've done communication, job done, let's move on. And I've had quite a few challenges with clients where you have to be able to prove to the chief executive, I'm sorry, boss, but what you did last October was great in itself, but this is a regular process, not a one-off wonder. So how can we make it work? And finally is getting clarity. What is it we really want to communicate? What's in it for me if I'm communicating to all the staff? Supposing I'm in a hotel and I've got all the food and beverage people sitting there listening. And, quite a few of them, their job basically is to make tea and coffee. And they say, well, what's all this nonsense about strategy, whatever that is? My job's to make tea and coffee. Are we still making tea and coffee? If so, why do I have to sit here and listen to all this nonsense? So, what's in it for me is often missed out. Why are you telling me all this? What's the benefit to me? Just some thoughts on the sorts of discussions you can get into on one very big area of improvement from my experience. So what do we do? Lynn touched on this at the beginning. Informa in particular focuses on training, but there is also the consulting side as well. So we can look at this three ways. We have our new certified program. That's what I've just been talking about, the 5 imperatives. We have a schedule one just after the summer break, and we can run this in-house whenever suits the organization concerned. I would say in my work on strategy execution over the last 20 years, the majority has been in-house or customized or consulting. It hasn't been public training as such. So that's the first thing. Second thing is we don't just run the whole program, the certified strategy execution professional course. We customize it and tailor it to a particular organization's needs. And that's a very common approach. And the third one is the consultancy, which generally is a longer engagement where you go in and really help the organization to implement what needs to be done, not simply to talk about and leave them with a list of actions to take, but actually work with them to execute those actions and therefore improve performance and improve execution. The first public course we've got scheduled for the Middle East is Dubai in September, 4-day program. But again, I'd emphasize that the in-company ones can be done any time of year, subject to A, available trainer, and B, your particular needs. So on both of these, contact Informa. There'll be follow-on to this webinar, and you'll get the necessary information from them. So please contact Informa if you have any issues on that. Finally, how does this new course fit with the existing Balanced Scorecard Institute courses, which some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with? So let me just look at it this way. So here's the new course on blue. From experience of running this subject for many, many years, at least half of the people have not had formal Balanced Scorecard training in any shape or form. They come direct. They are people at a slightly more senior level. They've got performance responsibility. They may be head of a department or division or a corporate executive, but what they are accountable for is business results. And they recognize the challenges and find that a course like this is very useful in helping them to identify areas that they personally need to work on within their organization. But we also have people who do take Balanced Scorecard training before. So we start with the best known training course, the BSP, which has been extremely popular over so many years. We continue to update it every year, but the fundamentals are there. And some people will come direct. Some will then take the KPI course as a follow-on to the Balanced Scorecard to deep dive or to drill down more into the measurement and monitoring side and the target setting. And these are areas that a lot of organizations struggle with. So they will take the KPI course as well. Others who are particularly focused on the Balanced Scorecard and work in a strategy management office often will take the Balanced Scorecard Master Professional course, which we run from time to time, and then move on. So generally, strategy execution is seen as a more senior subject than for the people who are working in a strategy office at the moment, and particularly those who are involved in the mechanics and the process of producing balanced scorecards. It's a great career development step for those who are interested in strategy management as a whole. And that's all I wanted to say. I want to leave time for Q&A and to keep this to a reasonable length. So thank you for listening. I hope it's made sense, or at least some of it's made sense. So please, any questions, fire away. And Lynn, I think you're going to sort of facilitate the questions.
I am, yes. Thank you so much for that, Alan. That was really interesting, very informative. So yes, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type it into the chat box and I can pose your question to Alan. Alan, one question is, obviously each organisation is different, but from your experience, what are the most common factors that lead to that execution failure?
I think you're right, of course, every case is different. It's case by case, but if I stand back, there are four major things. Number one is leadership. If you don't have effective leadership, and we mean from the very top of the organization, forget it, because if their priority is seen to be something else, then no one else is really going to engage in this. The second one is communication. I mean, it is incredibly poor, I have to say, in so many organizations, even those that will claim that they, oh yes, you know, we have a strategy department and we do this and we do that. You go and ask people, they haven't got a clue. So communication, communicate, communicate, and communicate, as the saying goes. The third one is about projects and project overload or initiative overload. This is extremely common. And the problem then, of course, you dilute, you're spreading your jam too thinly, as the saying goes. And so nothing really gets done because you're not giving it sufficient individual project attention. That's very common. And the final one is on the KPI side. You know, translating a strategy into a strategic plan, the heart of that are the KPIs. And choosing the wrong KPIs is incredibly common. KPIs that don't really answer what it is part of the strategy. If I've just got time, I'll give you a quick example. I often quote this one. A hotel, and it has the one of its strategic objectives, one of the components of its strategy is to enhance or strengthen customer loyalty. And of course, all hotels have their reward systems of one sort or another, their loyalty systems. So when I say to people, how would you measure this? And some people come up with great ideas, very practical, sensible ideas that frankly the hotels do use. But I'll guarantee some will come up with, well, customer satisfaction. And I say, that's not measuring loyalty, it's measuring satisfaction. And they're two different things. So if you want to have generally satisfied customers, is that a good thing to do? Yes, but it's not addressing the strategy of enhancing customer loyalty. And the example I quote, and it's, given I'm going to be going through Singapore in a day or two, a few days, Singapore Airlines, they're a great airline. They're one of the top three all the time, year after year after year. Occasionally, I travel with them. Am I customer satisfaction? I'm delighted. It's an excellent airline. Am I loyal? Absolutely not. I use Emirates because the Emirates network suits me infinitely better than the Singapore Airlines. So I can be delighted, but not loyal. So measure the right things to get the right behavior, the behavioral response of the people. So those are the four: leadership, communication, project overload, inappropriate KPIs, or targets.
Thank you, Alan. Sarah has got a couple of questions here. So firstly, how do you approach identifying and overcoming barriers to successful strategy implementation? I'll give you all three together in case it all comes in one answer. Yeah. Can you discuss your approach to managing change during the implementation of a new strategy? And how do you adapt your strategy execution plans in response to changing market conditions or unforeseen challenges?
Okay, I think the unforeseen challenges goes back to agility. In other words, we have to recognize that we may have our long-term ambitions, we talk about vision and goals, but things change. And we need to have the agility to be able to change those and respond to changing conditions. I mean, we just think of what we've been through with COVID. What so many organizations have done is to defer by probably 3 years their long-term ambitions. So what they wanted to achieve in 2024, they're now probably aiming to achieve in 27. How you identify underlying causes is more difficult. And sometimes you're hitting sensitive topics, particularly if you're talking about, say, you don't have great confidence in the leader of the organization, or he or she is no good at communication. It can be difficult to say that. I find as an outside consultant, I can be far more, blunt, I guess, in those assessments than is politically acceptable within the business. But I think the issue is, once you start to say, in a small work group, in a team session, what are the underlying reasons why XYZ doesn't work very well? Then you will start to get the ideas out. Now, there may be some sensitivities and politics and personalities. They need to be appropriately managed, but they shouldn't just be dodged. So I think the ideas are there if you give the forum to debate the underlying cause, not just the symptom. And what happens is people talk about anecdotal evidence of the symptom rather than saying, so what's the underlying cause?
Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Sarah. We also have one from Marwan, who said, thank you very much for a clear presentation. And what do you think would be the size of an organization that these techniques are feasibly applied? For instance, can it be used in a startup company?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. I mean, clearly the scale is totally different. But whether you're a startup, assuming you're more than me as a one-man business, but even it does apply to me as well, frankly. You need to communicate. If you're a small business with half a dozen people, communication is so important. You need to be clear what you're trying to do. You need to understand the role of each person. I mean, this is just basic good practice management. I mean, a lot of what I've talked about is, there's no rocket science at all. It's just do things properly. And however big or small, and whatever industry, whatever type of ownership, these things can apply. The scale is different, obviously. But as you get bigger and bigger, you start to say, well, we now need to have a more formal structure. This is the governance arrangement, and so on and so on. But the principles apply. The technique in a small business is the leader is having to do this and think about these issues. And a lot of it is done informally, verbally, rather than necessarily a lot of documentation and process. But the underlying issues still need to be addressed.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I think I've probably just got time for one more, which is, organizations put a lot of time and resources, including external consultation support, into developing their strategy and developing their strategic plans. So why would you say that many of the problems with execution can be traced back to that planning phase?
Short answer is from long experience. When you are developing a strategic plan with consultants, you're still having to create a lot of the input yourself. The consultants are not necessarily coming as industry specialists. Your strategy should be unique. They are helping facilitate. They will certainly bring some, if you get the right people, industry experience. But at the end of the day, management cannot abdicate responsibility. So the plan at the end of the day, when it is approved by the minister or the board of directors or whatever, needs to have the engagement of management supported by consultants, but the management need to have the ownership of the engagement. And they know their business. Just to take a trivial case, well, not trivial, but actually it's quite important, but you want to have more of a results culture and less excuse. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, I often ask this question in training courses. You say, how many of you want to push more to results and less to excuse? Everyone. What are you going to do? Oh. Well, what about those people that don't perform very well? Are you going to, help them to relocate somewhere else? Oh, can't do that. So how are you going to have more of a performance culture? Oh, yeah, we'll have to think about that. In other words, they haven't got a clue. And they're not prepared to engage with the serious thinking, which says, listen, there are consequences of this. There are consequences of poor performance, which means execution failure, but there's a consequence of good performance. And they can be quite tough. One of my sons worked for Goldman Sachs for many years. That's a tough organization. My goodness, they achieve results. But, it's a grueling effort. So there are consequences of whichever you're going to. Have you thought it through? And the answer very often is no. Consultants will raise the questions and you might get superficial answers back and you sort of tick it. Oh, yeah, they've thought about this. But have they really embraced the consequences of change? The answer very often is no.
Thank you for that, Alan. So we've hit the 3 o'clock mark perfectly. So first of all, thank you everybody for attending. I'm sure you got some great insight and information. And Alan, thank you very much for a fantastic webinar. As I say, some great information there, really thought-provoking points.
Can I just say, Lynn, sorry to interrupt, but just
No,
to stay on that, because if there are more questions, and I know we run out of time on these things, if you wanted to send the sort of any
them to you.
Unanswered questions from the chat box, or indeed anyone else, to me, email them to me. I can do quick response and as necessary get into a more detailed conversation with people if that would help.
That'd be great. Thank you for that. So thank you everybody for joining us. It's been great to have you on board with this webinar with Franklin, with the Informa Connect and with Alan. So we will send a follow-up email with some more details about some of the courses that Alan spoke about and how you can find out some more information if you would like to attend that as an individual, or if you would like to have that as something that you do internally within your organization. So again, one last time, thank you very much, Alan. Great session, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Lynn. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye, Alan.
What if you and your team can be even more informed, competitive, accomplished, even more successful, with programs designed to inspire and empower everyone to become even more. Introducing Informa Connect Academy. With hundreds of global, digital, and in-person training courses led by world-renowned industry experts, reimagining learning experiences for even more unlocked potential. Informa Connect Academy, available at informaconnect.com/academy.